Hi, folks. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. So today is a great day. We have David Bernstein with us. David is a dear friend, and we've been talking about so many things with David for the past 3 years now, David. And
Yeah, wow. Yes.
it's always been such a wonderful experience talking to him. And we thought, why not bring David's experience and expertise to everyone of each one of our audience. So welcome, David.
Oh,
Great to have you
wow.
with us today.
I'm flattered. I hope I can impress, right? The bar is high.
No, no.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Yeah, and yes, it's been an awesome experience of collaborating with you over this time period. So thanks for including me today.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it, David. So for our audience, can you give us a brief introduction about yourself and tell us what all have you been up to in your life so far?
You want me to put 58 years into 10 seconds or something, but yeah.
If you can.
From professionally speaking, obviously, I'll say I moved into the HR profession a little over 25 years ago, from a very different sounding profession. I was more in healthcare and patient care, therapeutic settings. Um, and most people are like, well, how'd you make that leap? But the gist of it is that there's so much in common with taking care of patients
Hmm.
as there is as well in trying to take care of a business. I
Right.
certainly had no interest in my professional career on the HR side being a therapist for the employee population, but more, let's say, euphemistically speaking, being the therapist for the business, right? On a broader scale, what does it take to kind of get to a better, higher levels of functioning
Yeah.
for an organization? That's what my passion has always been, is trying to make things work better.
Mm.
And so I found a niche in the HR world that's focused on, I'll say the operational aspects, but also development aspects of,
Mhm.
and when you bring the two together, I've had a fantastic run. Lately, I've been more involved, this back half of my career, more involved in building and selling solutions to go back to the HR world
Mm.
to help them be better at what they're delivering.
Mm.
But as a former HR practitioner, that was where my passion in HR started, was kind of being on those front lines and, making everything work, driving better, profitability in the business and meeting our hiring goals and business objectives. So yeah, anyway,
Awesome.
hopefully that provides a little bit of color and picture.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us, what are you building right now?
You know, in summary, because we've been talking a lot,
Yeah.
trying to uh, trying to bring a bit of a paradigm shift
Mm.
to the world of recruiting,
Mm.
have them think about what does it take to really get things done well. And I think all of us who are really trying to bring these
Yeah.
great technologies together are going to be right. If I just sum it all up with change, transformation visions are easier conversations.
Hmm.
The adoption, the change management is where the rubber meets the road in any of these solutions that we're bringing forward.
Mm.
And that's where we end up with, HR people they understand what they're doing isn't necessarily great,
Hmm.
but trying to figure out how to manage your day
Yeah.
and move it to a new way.
Yeah.
Um, that's hard. Change is hard. It's just one of those fundamental things. I saw it when I was working in patient care, right? Trying to get people to, think of different ways to run their life. It change is hard.
That's true.
It's not for
Especially
the faint of
behavior
heart.
change,
Yeah.
right? It's very
Yeah.
difficult to, you know, get people to get to a new behavior, new process, or a new way of working. It's really difficult.
Absolutely. Understanding what's in it for me, right? Because at the end of the day, there's this great socialistic kind of view, like, well, yeah, I go to work and I want my company to succeed.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I think, I often refer back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mm.
right? And these kind of base level things that motivate people,
Totally.
like keeping your paycheck
Correct.
and getting home on a reasonable hour and
Correct.
right, not burn it, right? So there's some of these kind of base level things that often
True.
impinge upon the ability to kind of get to these visions of what, the transformation stuff is awesome.
True.
But yeah, a quick side story, but my last role in corporate before I left
Mm.
to go to the vendor side was I did a 3-year, 10 country global HR technology implementation project. And my head of HR, he and I were at the whiteboard one day. We were solving world hunger because we were going to change the world of our business by putting in this, common technology
Yeah.
platform. And about 45 minutes later, we had all these kind of squiggles on this whiteboard. And he steps back and he strokes his chin a bit and he says, Dave, if it weren't for the people, we could get a whole lot more work done. Right?
Totally.
Because in 45 minutes, we had roughly solved for what had been plaguing the business functionally for such a long time, 10 disparate entities trying to operate as one company. So really multinational versus global, right? And it was easy to imagine how we would get there 3 years plus later,
Correct.
still working on it,
Still
right?
working on
So trying to turn a ship of 60,000 people towards a new way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's
Painful.
to paradigm shifts, right? So
Yes. But but the payoff, if you've done well, right, is
oh
great.
yeah,
It's very,
it's
very, very
rewarding.
rewarding. Yeah, for
Absolutely,
sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can see the impact for decades rather than few years only. You can see that organizations reap the benefits long after you have left them or you've gone.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. And what you bring oftentimes then, if done well, creates a culture and a mindset towards adopting an ongoing continuous process improvement kind of mindset.
Correct.
So, yeah. So,
So speaking of paradigm shifts, right?
yes.
I know that you're one person who's out there, who's basically at every event, talking to people, meeting people, industry folks, HR folks, even not from HR, and you're gathering so many insights about the market. You're gathering so many insights about the trends that are coming up. So what's happening in the HR tech space? What's happening from the tech adoption space in the HR tech space? So both supply and demand. So tell us, what are the latest trends that you're seeing out there?
Wow. Where to start, right? So,
Top three. Let's talk top
yeah,
three.
yeah, right. And to zero it in on this particular conversation, I think well, again, so my market experience is heavily focused in North America, right? So, depending on where the listeners are, it'd be interesting to see if this resonates globally. But in the US right now, there's well, let me go back and say first, everything old is new again, right? Right.
Okay.
So even for example, like I won't be surprised if bell bottoms come back into style, right? Right. You know what I mean? Fashion wise,
Yeah,
old
yeah.
fashions.
Correct.
And same thing in HR, I can remember 95 when I started in HR, we were talking about diversity and inclusion, for example, as being a very key thing. Here it is.
Still
It's,
is.
it's a big topic,
We
right?
haven't solved it yet, basically, right?
No. And in 95, one of the biggest things that I saw in learning development, recruiting throughout the business was actually trying to really understand this concept of matching and how do you really understand your human capital and right. And people don't want to be thought of as capital, but at the end of the day, they are a collection of skills that they bring to the table.
Correct.
So this concept of skills and skills extraction, skills management, development, this is long been a topic. It's resurfacing. And I don't think it's coincidental that we also now see this kind of the other big trend around what's going to be the impact of AI, broadly speaking, on a number of different HR practices,
Yeah.
right?
I think
Recruiting,
AI is
training, yeah,
definitely
all
a
of
hot
this.
topic, right? AI is definitely a hot topic, and we're going to come back to it. But I just want to go back to your second point that you mentioned, which is focus on skills, focus on
Yes.
capabilities. Why is it coming back, right? Is it because of the economic conditions being like that? Is it because people want to do more with less? Is it organizations are realizing that, hey, we are bloated and we need to realize how we do things? What's happening at the ground?
If you go back again, so Bernstein's, view of the world here, but what I think I've seen um, over the last couple of years has been a focus on performance management. It's been really a hot topic, right? And needing to blow up how we manage people and their performance. And that's, there's been some newer tools and thoughts on that. Yeah, so performance management has been, how do we blow this up? And they tied it to engagement and all these things, right? At the heart of it was this whole conversation of how do you really understand how someone is contributing to the business. This is my view, and I
That's a
think
core.
that
Yeah.
yeah, at the core, and so how do you then latch on to where someone's doing well and where there's room for improvement, right? How do you really kind of laser in on that conversation? My take is that it's not coincidental that as the diving in deeper around trying to revamp performance management solutions and processes, that it became what's resurfaced was, well, how do we measure? How do we understand people? How do we know what they're really all about? And so I do think, that and lasering quickly, there's a number of us certainly macroeconomic kind of topics. Globally, we're not birthing enough people to fulfill all the jobs that there
Right.
are. And so and so if you have good people, how do where I sit most of my working days these days is on the recruiting side of this equation, where skills then becomes one of those ways of
Correct.
how do you quickly dive in, because good people don't stay on the market a long time, right? And when you've got an oversupply of jobs and an undersupply of talent, right? How do you quickly zero in on who might be that close? Yeah, and
Absolutely. You need to
so
move fast. You need to move fast.
and same thing in business. There's been a whole set of phrases as well that we've been using in business in general, and starting to really kind of hit home in HR is this concept of digital transformation.
Right.
Which at the core is also about how do you give your business the ability to be agile in this world? Because if you do everything you've been doing and it's been successful, but all your competitors are moving faster than you now, guess what? You fall behind, even though you could have been a leader, but if you don't stay current, right? These newer technologies allow you to kind of be in the moment.
Correct.
That hasten the velocity of things. So again, it's just I think that there's a conglomeration of these kind of ideas that have come together. I think that, but again, everything old is new again. These are, digital transformation today, we used to just call it business process reengineering in the 90s, right? So, slap a new label on it, but it's about using these newer technologies to re-engineer and imagine your business. And, again, I think the currency of understanding talent, the skills level stuff is kind of at the core of that, right? How do we understand who people are and what they bring to work?
So this is basically a demand side view, right? This is basically what's happening from an organizational construct standpoint. What's happening from a supply side? There's an influx of AI. Everything has AI now, right? And what's your view?
Yeah, we can talk about it next about from the HR perspective. Yeah, but
Yes.
from the supply side,
Right.
it's interesting because, well, I have not had the personal experience of ever being happy when I call in to some big business and they want to segue me over to some AI solution to handle me so that they can titrate down the number of humans that actually get through the process, right? There's this, and in recruiting, the same kind of thing. I've yet to meet candidates that really are excited to engage with AI as the mechanism, right? This idea that AI is going to replace people.
Yeah.
I don't see it anytime immediately. People want to deal with people. We are social creatures, and what we do throughout HR is such a human-centric activity. It's hard to imagine that people go away, right? But the roles that we play in HR will definitely continue to evolve. And that's kind of been, so in the consumer world, I don't think it's working well. Most people complain about customer service, for example, being horrible, even though that's where everybody who's developing these technologies thinks is right. But they treat it like as if it's a replacement. Go talk to my chatbot. They haven't, really, this is what I think is growing, is this kind of understanding of how you bring it appropriately together. It's right, trying to do a change.
Is it go talk to my chatbot the right approach, or is it, hey, I'm going to use a chatbot to train my customer rep to be able to respond in a better manner? Right. Which is a proper use of technology. Two very different propositions, right? At the end of the day.
Yes, an offloading versus a how do you empower people? And it's just a different. So again, people are seeing the low-hanging fruit on the business side, so they're buying these tools to try to throw it into the mix. I think we're still really in this early stage of seeing what's
Right.
going to stick, right? And these technologies are adapting and coming on so fast,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
I used to work for a company that we did natural language processing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had these kind of word clouds where,
Yeah.
for example, the word yes, is it yeah, sure, okay, right? And you would
All of
teach
them are same. Yeah.
yeah, and all of them equal yes, right? Right? Today, that looks prehistoric to the
Oh,
way LLMs are
absolutely.
working, right?
Absolutely. That's just 2 years back, 2 years old, right? So
There you go, right? So look how quickly these things are
yeah,
suddenly, right? It's a
absolutely.
hockey stick on it.
Yeah,
So it's going to be an interesting tension, I think,
for
because
sure. And you
what's
can actually
happening in the
see that
yeah.
tension palpable out there, right? So people are skeptical about AI and how it's gonna, even though, and I totally agree with you, it's not a replacement. In my mind, it's an augmentation of human skills, right? AI can augment human skills and make it better rather than replace human beings primarily. And there's a huge
For sure.
skepticism out there that, hey, is the technology good enough to be able to replace or slash augment as well or not?
Right.
There are believers and there are non-believers currently. No.
For sure. Yeah. I mean,
Now we
you
come to the HR side,
to
right? So what is the HR thinking about it, right? Which is, are they looking at AI? Are they keen on AI? Are they looking to experiment, not experiment, or they still want to observe from a distance and say, hey, let's wait and watch?
Well, so the last stats I read, which was just actually last week, I saw a survey. So there's an organization called SHRM, the
Mm-hmm.
Society of HR Management.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they did a North American focused kind of survey, but in the US, there's only about a 20% of those surveyed were talking about actively doing something with AI in the coming
Hmm.
12 months,
Hmm.
right? So still nascent,
Correct.
right?
Hmm.
Still, so we always see this, right? These adoption curves, right? Those early adopters and innovators, right?
Yep.
Actually, innovators and then early adopters,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Those blaze the trail for the rest of the world, who then
Right.
is, wants to watch and see and
Right.
learn from everybody else's kind
Right.
of pioneering efforts.
Hmm.
So those 20% that are out there are trying,
Hmm.
right? But they'll probably make a ton of mistakes,
Hmm.
and they'll learn. Hopefully, they can learn from them quickly.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's a lot of this stuff they're very focused on, again, handling volume,
Correct.
and trying to handle, kind of real low-hanging fruit things like 24-hour day support because we don't have people around 24
True.
hours a day, or
True. True.
these kind of, really just,
Hmm. Hmm.
banal kind of use cases, not the real high value
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
knocking down that stuff first is, I guess, where how can we
Yeah.
leverage this? But when I talk to most HR folks, again, I'm gonna make a bold statement here, but what I have not found is that most of them don't really understand at the core what AI really today is all about doing
Yeah.
is understanding pattern recognition at
Correct.
scale.
Correct. And
Patterns.
replicating tone, speaking, how do you communicate, etc. Right? Or you
All
can
of
do
those
all
are
that.
patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, all
Correct.
of those are
Absolutely.
examples of patterns,
Absolutely.
and and so since they don't really understand that it's really of all sorts of types of pattern
Hmm.
recognition,
Hmm.
they don't really understand how to leverage it in ways to their advantage, right? So, and so then you got technologists who come in and say, well, so easy examples
Hey, here's
are,
a use case that you can take.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
right, and I'm going to define it for you, and
Correct.
but then it leads to all sorts of other problems like biases, because if you're going
Hmm.
to pattern a model after somebody and
Correct.
say, go, right, this is what good looks like,
Absolutely.
then all the biases that went into how that person got to be where they are and and
Correct.
who defined them to be good then get baked into these kind of
Totally.
pattern, right? So um yeah, in New York there's a newer law on the books. They call it NY 144.
Hmm.
But it's starting to put the onus of responsibility on buyers of technology solutions,
Hmm.
that to make sure that they have validated that there's not inherent bias in these tools that they're using to make hiring and firing decisions, for
Right.
example,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. And
But
that's a
again,
very important point, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are trying to remove biases from human decisions, and we can't have inherent biases inside technology itself, right? Because technology is supposed to remove biases rather than enforce them subtly, isn't it?
Yeah, but who's training and who's building these, right? It's
That's
people,
humans are.
right?
Correct.
I mean, I don't know. You probably have heard the famous story that we all kind of tend to refer to when we point to baking and bias is that, Amazon recently had to kill a whole project where they spent a ton of money and time trying to create some kind of assessment-like tools.
Right.
But it turned out that what it really showed was that their hiring practices were largely favoring white males.
Yeah.
And all they were doing then was
Because
going to
again,
replicate that
it's
at
basically
scale,
going
right?
on a pattern, right? Trying to
Exactly.
measure success through historical patterns and performance data that they might have. So there you go.
Absolutely. Another form of pattern recognition. And yeah, so skills, if we go back to the skills conversation, if we can try, maybe actually, as we think about it here, maybe that's a way to try to level the playing field.
Level the
I don't
playing
know.
field. Yeah. So
But
very
then how do
interesting.
you how do you assess somebody to know? I mean, defining skills and what's important for a job,
Yeah.
you could eventually get to some agreement, but how do I decide if Ashish is really
Good at it
excellent
or
at that
not? Yeah,
skill, or he's
what's his level of expertise?
yeah. My
Right.
opinion
And
might be different.
how can I help Ashish become better at that skill if he's not, right? I think that's where a particular use case comes in. And this is where, I remember one recent piece that I read from Josh Person. And he wrote recently that the kind of adoption that he's seeing from, in the L&D space, in terms of penetration of AI, it's mind-boggling. The pace at which he's looking at the use cases as well as the adoption is really rapid.
Right. Again, I think that L&D departments tend to be budget constrained, right? It's one of these kind of weird things where everybody knows you got to invest in your people and grow, and yet it's obviously typically smaller teams with lesser budget dollars.
Correct.
So how do you scale that? Right? How do you create a department where you have now more avatars and right, and it can reach out and say, Ashish, it looks like this is a class that's probably would fit well for your career development, and make those recommendations. Again, pattern recognition in a use case, right? So I'm not surprised, it's a, back to the early example I gave, I worked for a 60,000 person company, broken up into a huge population of machine operators, right? Because we were, a manufacturing company building things, and then a huge amount of, front office people kind of going out and selling, and, and then the HR and finance and all IT, all that kind of other stuff, right? Back front and middle of office roles. It's how do you really effectively provide development programs for 60,000 people in all those different personas? So yeah, it seems like how do you scale that, right? So again, I think for a lot of these use cases right now in AI are about trying to enable you to kind of work through volume. I see it a ton in recruiting as well. They're all really volume focused plays.
Awesome. Let's Bernstein it up, I would say. And
and do what?
And basically say, what are the three core messages that you'll pass on to HR folks, and what are the three core messages that you'll pass on to HR vendors?
Okay, well, so let's take those in pieces, right?
Yep.
So which one first?
Let's talk about the HR folks first. So what's your 2 or 3 core pieces of message for the HR folks?
Just broadly speaking, are we talking about in this AI kind of topic?
Anything and everything. What comes to your mind? I mean, totally.
Wow. So
it's a blank canvas. Paint anything.
I know. I'm going to tell you a quick story as an aside, but I'll tie it in here. I was speaking at a conference once, and it was actually really at the first couple years relative to the emergence of people analytics. I had been in a position where I was able to help lead the conversation globally around how we thought about adopting a more data-centric view in HR. And honest to God, true story, someone came up to me after the presentation and she said to me, you know what? I'm in my mid-50s. I'm going to retire in 5 years. What do I need to do just to hang on for the next five? I didn't
That's
go
my
into
problem.
a,
I don't
yeah,
need to adopt people analytics, right? I just need to hang on for the next 5 years.
that's right. Back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What do I need to do? And it was so interesting because, it reminded me that a lot of folks in HR,
Hmm,
who are in HR leadership roles today, and this is not meant in any kind of
hmm,
pejorative, insulting way, but they didn't go into HR 30 years ago
hmm,
because numbers and math were their best friend,
hmm,
right? A lot of people gravitated to HR early on because it
hmm.
was a very different function 30 years
Yeah,
ago. And the
yeah.
people who are in leadership today were the ones that started long, way back, and they grew their career.
Hmm.
And it wasn't a requirement to be technology and number centric and analytic and right.
Which now is, right?
Yeah, I mean, being
It's
an
a
HR
different world
professional,
altogether. Yeah, correct.
look, even on recruiting, right? And then you asked for, uh, I'll summarize it in a second here, but to me, for example, recruiting is one of the most strategic business
Totally,
processes in a
totally.
company, right? If you don't get that right, how do you get your sales strategy
You
right? How
messed
do you
up.
get your product design
Everything
right?
is
How do you,
messed up.
I know it, and yet most recruiting teams treat themselves like order takers and just, fulfilling kind of job orders. So I guess one of the things is really understand how your company makes money or saves money, and how do you contribute strategically
Hmm,
to the success of your business?
hmm,
Because that, if you all you're doing, so let's tie in the AI thing here,
hmm,
because if what you're doing are things that can later be done by a machine,
hmm.
currently they're not because a human,
Then you're
there
gonna
wasn't
get
a machine
redundant
to
for
do it.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're out. What do you do, right? So, you know, continuous learning, staying up to speed, and really understanding the strategic nature of what you're doing, right? Those are core. If you're not able to understand how you contribute to the
Yeah.
success of the businesses you're an HR practitioner
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
then then you might want to revisit
Yeah.
and find out, how are you contributing? How does what you do help your company make money or save money every day,
Right.
right? So anyway, yeah, hopefully
No,
that's
that
a
was
helpful bit of
powerful,
guidance.
David. Yeah. So, what's your message for the vendors?
The vendors. Well, so we're in, I would suspect that 20 years from now, another generation, right?
Hmm,
That those coming into HR roles today will be more business-minded,
hmm,
strategy
hmm,
focused,
hmm,
analytic.
hmm,
But they're not there yet, right?
hmm,
So vendors are coming in, and I see a lot of this where I see all these vendor ecosystems where there's folks who've never even had a day in the life of being in the shoes of the people that they're trying to sell to,
hmm,
which is fine. You don't have to have previously been in HR, but because what they're not doing is they're not getting the advisory or the understanding from the actual market. They come in with great ideas,
hmm.
but because they've not been in the function of the
Yeah.
day
Yeah.
and the mindset, and they don't really understand the psychology of the people who
Yeah.
will have to write them checks.
Right.
They come in with these fantastic ideas and but don't really understand how to go to market in a way that, you know, and some of them will live off of the buzz they can get because their product is, for
Hmm,
example, riding this AI wave.
hmm.
But um, yeah, it's stickiness. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, when you create continuous value, what I've ongoing seen is, people will write you a check repeatedly when they understand how your software
True.
makes value for
True.
them in their day, right?
True.
And this is not a CFO statement. And when I'm talking about HR and selling to HR, so
True.
vendors need to understand the buyer, the direct user, needs to feel like this is augmenting their capabilities, isn't going to
Correct.
put them out of a job,
Correct.
and all these other things, right? They need to really understand their buyer in a different way than I typically see.
Yeah.
A long
And
answer
it's
to your short
and
question,
it's
but
and it's much deeper than most people think it is, right? I think the core nuance that you mentioned right now, which is understanding where are the most senior leadership people coming from in their history. How did they start in the function and how have they evolved? It's a very
mhm,
deep thought process. If you don't understand that, then your sales approach is going to be very different, isn't it?
100%. It's yeah. So I just there's a market research company that's, I'll just take it as a recruiting
Hmm.
example, that they're called Talent Tech Labs. For anybody who's listening, want to check them out. They track over 2,500 different software vendors that could those vendors are broken out into probably 50 plus categories
Okay.
of the types of software that someone in HR could buy
Wow.
to support the recruiting function.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine trying to be the buyer of that, right? If you don't understand, yeah, it's and again, so in '95 when I was when I first started, so I worked at PeopleSoft, right, which is a very large ERP solution specializing in HR. We were a user of our own product. To buy the product, you were at least $1 million in software and probably 3 to 5 years of implementation. And so, and these were big software things. Today, right? So commoditized.
Get started in a week's time. That's it.
Right? A startup, right? Anybody with a decent idea can go over to AWS, for example, and turn on a cloud-based system. And you're right, and have a wireframe up and yeah, so so it's not I don't think it's coincidence that we're seeing the explosion of all of this. But yeah, they don't understand a lot of these. The other thing I might say that I think is really critical, a lot of these tools are point solutions that any one of them in and of themselves may provide some ROI, really provide a value, but they're really in a gestalt. They're really in a that expression, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You can't just throw a bunch of different disparate tools.
It doesn't work. Yeah.
Right, and expect it all to kind of suddenly magically happen.
It worked 10 years ago, but not anymore. I think it creates more inefficiencies than it creates value for the organization at the end.
And it's a very real thing as well. That again, back to stats, some of the things that I read about, but just on the recruiting side alone, the average North American HR department, again, these surveys tend to be focused here, but 21 systems.
Yep.
Can you imagine? I mean, that includes your email and your Slack systems and all that. But to get through a day, the typical TA professional is touching 21 systems.
That's a lot.
Or in a week, right? Job boards and all these various tools. And there's a very real thing. It's called toggle fatigue, is what it's starting to be kind of termed. But when you have to kind of stop, learn, go do a different thing, right? It just is a productivity killer, right?
It is.
Yeah. So integrated solutions that marry up with workflows that are in real life, understanding your buyer, again, I'm giving you some kind of, hopefully some, insights for the vendor community. Anybody here who's listening, please understand your buyers and what they're up against daily, right? They can't afford to have, and yet one more tool in their portfolio of things, unless it has to be woven together. So.
Awesome. I think we're just coming towards the end of our time today, David. Thank you so much. It was wonderful, like always. And,
wow, that was fast. Didn't realize.
Don't worry, this is not the last time you're going to see David. We're going to get David on another podcast session, but the topic is going to be very, very different for that one. But do watch out for that. And for today, thank you so much, David.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me here, Ashish. Yeah, I hope, yes. And if anyone wants to connect and talk further on these, I'm passionate about these kind of topics. So feel free.
And you can reach out to David on LinkedIn. He's going to accept, and he's going to give you time as well. He's a rock star.
Oh, well, thank you, Ashish, again. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, David. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.